Gather round the campfire, friends. I have a creepy, unsolved mystery for you. It's the tale of a serial killer who stalked the dance halls of 1960s Glasgow, called Bible John. It all starts back in 1968 at a popular downtown dance club called the Barrowland Ballroom. Kind of a dodgy place where married folks would go to get their groove on away from their spouses. Their Thursday dance nights were actually called Grab a Granny Night, if you can believe it. Now, on this cold February night, there's this nurse named Patricia. She's recently split from her husband and moved back in with her parents and young son. Patricia tells her folks she's going dancing at a nice place called the Majestic, but she ends up at Barrowland instead, probably because she knew her parents wouldn't approve if she told them the truth. The 25-year-old dances with some dudes on the dance floor, has some drinks, the usual. Closing time comes around midnight, and Patricia heads into the night to walk home solo. But she never makes it. The next morning, a man taking a shortcut to work discovers Patricia's body, dumped in the street near her house. At first, he mistakes her for a mannequin. She's so pale and battered. But one touch tells him otherwise. Poor Patricia is completely nude, flat on her back, with cuts and bruises all over. The cops take ages to show up, and by the time they get there, rigor mortis has set in. She'd clearly been violated and beaten before being strangled to death with her own stockings. Her handbag and belongings are nowhere to be seen, likely nabbed by her killer. There's just one personal item left behind, a used sanitary napkin, because it turns out she was on her period when murdered. This chilling detail is important. But the Glasgow cops think this is just some freak one-off murder. Crime was crazy high back then after all. They figure Patricia met with some perv who walked her home and things got violent. Case closed. But folks start questioning that when just 18 months go by and another lass ends up dead in almost identical circumstances. It's August 1969 when 32-year-old mother of three, Jemima, heads out solo to hit the downtown bars. She leaves her kiddos at her sister Margaret's for the night with plans to party it up and return for them in the morning. But Jemima never makes it back. Margaret grows worried as the hours tick by with no word. Then the neighbor kids start gossiping about finding a body while playing in an abandoned house nearby. Margaret shakes it off at first, but when Jemima is officially late to pick up her babies, Margaret decides to check out that creepy house for herself, just in case. And there, she finds her worst fear come true. Jemima's battered, bloody corpse tossed inside, beaten, violated, and strangled. The scene is hauntingly similar to Patricia, right down to that sanitary napkin left near Jemima's body. 'Cause wouldn't you know, she was menstruating too when attacked. Margaret IDs her sister straight away, even though her face had been battered beyond recognition. This time, the cops can't write it off as random. It doesn't take them long to link these two murders and realize Glasgow has a serial killer in their midst. One targeting women who were out on their own, cozying up to them at the bar to get them alone, before unleashing brutal violence. They start digging into Jemima's last night, and turns out she met a young red-headed fella at the pub and left with him to go dancing at Barrowland, the same club Patricia vanished from. Bar staff remember the cute couple. They said Mystery Man was quite tall and well-dressed. Nobody had seen him before that night. Witnesses last spotted Jemima and her ginger date walking out of the club into the night together. But it seems Bible John, as he'd come to be dubbed, wasn't quite finished with his murderous Bible studies. Just a year after killing Jemima, he set his sights on another gal for a sinister night out. 29-year-old Helen had just moved back to Glasgow with her military husband after years abroad. One Saturday, she decides to hit the town to meet up with her sister Jean and girlfriends. Helen's husband isn't thrilled with the idea, but she reassures him she'll make it home safe. He even gives her cash for a taxi ride back, hoping to avoid any trouble. Jean comes by to escort Helen downtown, the two sisters catching the bus over to the shops and pubs, all buzzing on a weekend night. Now by this point, cops have connected the earlier slaying and are even passing out flyers warning lasses about this mysterious red-headed killer targeting women alone at night. But the sisters aren't worried. They figure they're safe sticking together in numbers. Eventually, Helen and Jean end up inside the very same Barrowland Ballroom, dancing the night away. And wouldn't you know it, they end up meeting two fellas there named John and John. What are the chances? One John has dark hair, and the other rocks a fiery red mane. Our sisters have a grand old time drinking and dancing and flirting it up with the two Johns. When closing time nears, dark-haired John decides to bounce and catch the bus home alone, leaving red-haired John still hanging with Helen and Jean out front as they all wait for a taxi. They all take the same cab, and John says he lives along the same route. Later, Jean will recall this John character getting quite chatty in the cab ride. He's going on about working a steady job, but still being a bachelor. Said his name might have been John Templeton or John Simpleson or something like that. Doesn't sound suspicious at all, right? But then things take a hard turn down creepy lane. This John starts going off about how religious his childhood was, and how his daddy used to say dance halls were dens of evil sin, and how he called the single gals who went there adulterous. He starts quoting scripture and going on some judgmental rant, like a holier-than-thou type. Jean thinks he might have some military or police background from his demeanor. And the clincher? Jean notices his front teeth overlap a bit when he smiles. Jean gets dropped off first without issue, but Helen never makes it home. Her husband waits up, but eventually falling asleep as dawn arrives with still no Helen. And there's a reason for that. She's been dumped just down the road, laid out, beaten, and lifeless in someone's garden after being violated and strangled savagely. Her clothes torn, possessions scattered around her except for her missing handbag, telltale sanitary napkin present as well, and possibly the creepiest calling card yet, a prominent bite mark left on poor Helen's body. Police easily match the overlapping tooth imprint to the grinning John from the taxi. Scotland launches its biggest ever manhunt, seeking the monster newly dubbed Bible John. They circulate sketches of his description everywhere, but the sharply dressed, sinister Scotsman remains at large. After Bible John's last known slaying of Helen in '69, cops went hardcore trying to identify him. They had detectives go undercover in the Barrowland Club week after week, trying to spot suspects. They visited every barber shop in the region, looking for hairdressers who'd cut that distinct bright ginger mop. They even checked with dentists all over to see if any patients had front teeth that noticeably overlapped. But it was that eerie menstrual evidence that really had them chasing theories. Some criminal profilers posited that perhaps the killer had sexually assaulted other victims who survived over the years but never reported it out of shame. They figure maybe it was the women happening to be on their periods those nights that triggered his explosive violence. Others think if he was a religious fanatic like Bible John claimed, seeing that unclean blood could have sent him into a righteous fury. Almost 50 years later, Glasgow PD are no closer to catching this scripture-quoting slayer. Whoever he really was must have hung up his neatly pressed suit not long after that savage 1969 murder and faded back into society under a new name, leaving just a nickname and a sketch behind to haunt the dance halls and street corners where 3 innocent women breathed their last breath.